we finished our time here, and so looking back, what are some of the things that you feel you've gotten from your experience here that's reflected in your art or helped to inform your art over the years?
I'm up first. I mean, I suppose asking questions, learning to ask questions, loving to ask questions, listening to questions, probably asking more than you listen to, but trying to listen as well, and engaging in that dialogue. I feel like dialogue was the bedrock of every class I ever took here, and you know, essentially everything that we do is engaging in a dialogue on a larger scale now, and figuring out what are the turning moments in a conversation to get people to push past their sort of pat answer and actually ask themselves something meaningful and think about things in a different light. And I think empathy was the other piece of it. I feel like that was a big part of our learning, was trying to think about things from other perspectives, get out of your own personal headspace, and certainly being somebody who tells stories, listens to stories, makes something for the world to consume. You have to ask people to be empathetic, you have to become empathetic, and you have to push yourself to think about things from other perspectives all the time. So that's my part.
Ditto. Wow. I would, to dumb it down a little bit, I would say just basically the intensity, the absolute sort of, at least for me, the laser focus and almost obsessive quality that you needed, or at least I needed, to get through Swarthmore and to get the most out of it. I don't want to say to do well, because that would be, but I did okay. But to do well and to get the most out of it, it took an intensity that I wasn't sure I had, but by the time I finished, 4.5 years later, I was absolutely feeling like, okay, I kind of have acquired an ability to apply myself and see through challenges that maybe I didn't think I could. And with my writing, at least with fiction, fortunately, that brings with it an intangible quality and an energy that you may not pick up in astronomy or intro to econ or what it was, some of the seminars, but my Lord, the ability to come out of this with that sort of, again, the ability to focus and push through and turn it on when you need to, and then to have the drive with the intangible, the material that you've come up with, that you're bringing to the world, or trying to bring to the world, or trying to bring to life. So Swarthmore, absolutely, I'd say confidence and the ability to just work so damn hard.
Yeah, the hard work was definitely a huge part. On a sort of piggybacking on those, the Quaker Foundation, I think, really became a big influence for me. This idea of the pursuit of social justice, this sense of community. I've taken this idea of community into places that I've gone. I live back in Salt Lake City now, and jumped straight into our community council, and have worked a lot with just that, I guess, the sense of how to build that community, especially today in our culture where things are so fractured, or so sort of, we have this tunnel vision of social media and the places we get our information, just to be able to be part of that, or to build a community. So that was part of the Swarthmore thing. The other thing, in a very direct way, when I came to Swarthmore, I was an engineering major, and I was on the pre-med track, and that was, and there are a lot of nodding heads out there, right? So, and it was actually at a lunch with Leah Fernald's mom, who was another Swati, who said, and I think all of us at that lunch, it was a group of students, and every one of us were pre-med, I think, except for Leah. It was her mom, so she knew better than to tell me about that. And she said, "Oh yeah, pre-med, it's so easy. It's such an easy path." And I was like, "What?" She said, "Well, you just get on the path, and I'm not saying it's easy, but it's great. You have certain results at the end. You have you don't see a lot of doctors holding up signs on cardboard, that say, 'We'll do surgery for food,' or whatever. And you're respected by your community, and you can make a difference in the world." And I said, "Well, yeah, those are all things that I'm interested in." And she said, "Well, the thing is, anyone who is willing to do the same sort of years of work, whether it's graduate school or the years of getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and doing their version of a residency and a postdoctoral fellowship and all that kind of stuff, can also do those kinds of things. You can also make a difference in your community, and you can, and you will be respected in your field." And it was the first time for me that I had that idea was just planted. This sort of idea that, okay, well, there are other ways to be able to contribute, and that is not to say that being a doctor is easy, but just this idea that there's so many ways that we can make a contribution to the world that are slightly different. So anyway, I wrote Anne Fernald a thank you a few years ago. Although it took years for me that to sort of distill down to something where it actually made sense to me.
So when I was on the train coming down, I was reading over those questions, and I was actually wondering about this, because in a way, the first work I did as an activist and an environmental journalist and working in community and doing real environmental justice work really did seem to stem from Swarthmore, from the work I did and everything you were saying, Dallas. And I thought, well, how did this switch to writing fiction, how was it generated from here? Because it was a real conflicted one for me, and I was wondering that. And then I got to the dorm about an hour and a half ago. So it was in Wharton, and I don't remember if I ever went into Wharton when I was here, but I got in. And I'm sure you do too. I have these dreams about this dorm room, and sometimes they're nightmares of I can't make it back to my real life and I have to take a test. But I got to the dorm, and I felt this incredible sense of peace and real happiness, and I realized what Swarthmore gave me was the ability to be alone with my own mind. And that is something that I really, it's hard. And of course we didn't have phones. We didn't even have phones in our rooms. And we really worked a lot. And even though we were often sitting with people, we were alone doing that. And that was what I need, that's what you need to do creative work. And to know that the community will be there and you'll be in the community again, but you can remove yourself and sit in the library for hours and show up at Sharples later and people will be there. And to trust in that, to trust in being by yourself. And that definitely is what I got from here.
Spend a lot of time by yourself. So I echo everything that everybody said. The one thing is, Joe, in terms of discipline, I think you probably already had that when you came here, and because I think about that a lot. I think about Swarthmore as is it the place that made me able to do stuff? I think I was already able to do stuff. I think Swarthmore somehow perfected that ability to become really obsessive and to just sit down and do that, because I think this college attracts a certain kind of person who has to kind of be willing to do that to begin with. But I definitely, that trait in me definitely increased here. For me, I think the biggest word for me for Swarthmore when I think about it is interdisciplinarity and the love I developed for interdisciplinarity. Swarthmore taught me that it's not valuable to try to draw boundaries around things a lot. That the more you let those boundaries be porous, the more fruitful the conversation's going to be, the thoughts, and the work. So for me, with this particular book, I was in grad school for forever. My close friends here know that it was a really long slog to the end. And I was studying British Victorian literature. And this is an American book. And when I entered grad school, typical Swarthmore, I kind of wanted to do a double dissertation. I wanted to do both an American and British transatlantic dissertation, and actually entered that way. And my entry essay was about that. And after 10 years in grad school, it became wise to try to chop off one of those things. So the American one is the one that went, and I stuck with British, and I wrote my thesis on Dickens primarily, but also on George Eliot and Wilkie Collins. But always that American history always was pulling me, and I would sort of secretly read about it on the side, even while I was working on British literature. So that's very, right, like, totally geeked out, like, very, and that's how I was here. I loved everything I did here, even, apologies to the math people, but, the one stats course I had to take to fulfill the distribution was interesting to me. I wouldn't have taken it if I hadn't had to, but it was interesting. And so that pull of the curiosity, someone mentioned curiosity, I think Dallas, the curiosity for everything completely contributed to what eventually formed this book. And eventually, I feel like this book is actually the dissertation in American history that I didn't get to write. And it is the project that followed my dissertation. So the other thing, lastly, is I think that curiosity for me spills over into people, and I have certainly an introvert side, but I would classify myself as an extrovert. I love people. I loved people here. I loved all the people I met here. I love all the people in this room. My heart is racing with joy seeing these faces. I love being here, and I love people, and that has been a great thing to carry on the book tour. Because, people come up to you, and I immediately have this mindset of, what is this person's story? Before they even say a word. And it's made me, I feel like Swarthmore and the incredibly positive experience I had with people at Swarthmore has made me open to people in the world. So that's been really wonderful, and I actually think about that all the time around Swarthmore specifically.
This is for you, so don't drop the mic yet. We'll start with you.
Oh,
We do, because you posed sort of an interesting question when you said that you like people. And I know everybody here is interested in the arts, but I think they're interested in you all as individuals as well. So thank you. See, the life of the artist, we're always putting lives back up.
And the
There you
importance
go, our life.
and the importance of a good stage crew.
There it is. And so it goes into the question that I have about emotional and mental health and wellness. The life of an artist goes up and down. You've kind of started us with talking about the length of time it took from your first book that you wrote and having the agent that stuck with you through the years, and having your book out that everyone wants to buy in the bookstore.
All free copies.
There you go, all free copies. But talk a little about the one thing I think that we as artists don't get asked about is how are we taking care of our mental and emotional health? And with suicide and depression rates just rising, not only with artists, but just with human beings in general, I think that's an important topic. So can you start us off with that?
I can't remember who was it Corinna? Was I telling you when I had the breakdown?
Yes.
Yes, it was Corinna and Dita, right. I literally had a breakdown after the very last book day. Like a total mental and psychic breakdown. I couldn't see. I took to bed for 3 days. It was this total Victorian illness thing that happened in London. It was cold, it was raining. I literally took to a room for 3 days and lay in bed in the dark, and I had this kind of miraculous recovery too, which there are a lot of messages there, right? We never do that when we're sick, right? When's the last, I don't, and I know a lot of people I know don't. When you're sick, you don't, because everyone is telecommuting today, and there's no real the idea of recovery is so different today. I can't remember the last time I actually licensed myself to be in bed for 3 days and not do anything, not even watch television, read nothing. I don't think that I've ever done that. I had to do it. I mean, I was in London and I just fell down, you know, and it was because I had been on the road for almost a year, just traveling. And I'm a pretty good sleeper. I mean, I sleep, but just the energy. And talking to so many people, which, as I said, I love talking to people. I love doing these events. But it was a lot, and I wasn't really pacing myself. You know, I wasn't doing my yoga the way I should have been. And so, you know, life is gonna give you these wake-up calls, whether you like it or not. I'm sure people have stories, like it just happens. But I mean, that's not an answer to the question, what do you do? That's the cautionary tale of you need to do something or that's going to happen to you.
Right.
And you guys can talk about what you do.
Sure, I'll give you a list of what you have to do. Well, one thing I'm realizing is that one reason that it felt, I mean, I really wanted to come to my 20th reunion, and I didn't because I was traveling, but I think I was nervous to come before that because I was nervous, like everyone went to Swarthmore and they're going to have a list of accomplishments and I won't have as many accomplishments, right? And so I think that's part of what I've had to learn to do working as an artist is to deal with the comparison and compare and despair, right? And how we judge each other. Especially, we all graduated the same day, so it's like we should be following a certain thing. I got really sick in my late 20s. I learned I had celiac disease. I'd had it my whole life. I had like powered through Swarthmore kind of without a lot of nutrients. And I had to deal with that for a few years. I mean, I didn't take to bed, I kept working, but that slows it down. Parenting has slowed everything down, right? Those of you. And so it's been this sort of empathy for myself and for others and realizing that whatever track we're on, everyone has these life things that come up. And so I guess that's not what you do, but it's sort of how you can sort of, how I try and retrain my brain from saying, oh, well, this person went, reading the class notes and being like, well, they now have their kids and they now have their this and this, and to being like, we all have our lives and our stories. That's why I like fiction, because we all have our things we're dealing with and how we deal with the world. And so sort of growing that mindset and just being in touch with people and, especially people who are working in your same thing, like being in touch with other writers and crying together. That's always fun.
So I live in Utah, as I've said, and it's the multi-level marketing capital of the world. So the answer is doTERRA. And I will sell you. To me, I think that comparison thing is huge. And I think so. I try to stay not depressed by avoiding Facebook and not listening to NPR, which I used to listen to nonstop in my studio until I realized that I was terribly depressed. So I get the news. I do like NPR, I support NPR, but within certain boundaries. But to me, I need to be outside. So that's part of why I live in the Rocky Mountains, and I realize if I don't get out and get on my mountain bike or out into the snow, it's just not gonna go well. And I'm not patient with my kids, and I'm upset with a lot of what's going on. So, and I think that's hard to do. I think it feels. I think part of what I got from the intensity of Swarthmore too, just to put back into that, but this feeling also that you really need to be engaged in doing stuff all the time. And it felt very selfish to even think about being an artist, and it feels very selfish sometimes to just go outside and take a mountain bike ride, even though it's actually going to make everyone around me a lot happier too. So it's not selfish, it's giving.
Well said. I gotta say, I was working on the first book before we had our first child, and I felt an insane amount of pressure because not only because every time I come home and my mom would say the same thing, "You're 32. You're 33. You're 34. When are you gonna?" So my first book came out and I was 37. So those talks ended at 37. But my child, our son was on the way. And my wife was saying, we just had we had one of those moments where, of course, she was going off and using her business degree and Swarthmore degree and being a productive citizen, and I was writing. And we had that talk where it was sort of like, well, this is actually gonna have to be the draft that you sell, because the other 17 drafts didn't sell. So, because we're about 6 months away now from our life changing pretty dramatically forever, let's make this one work. And so that kind of lit a fire under me, and any sort of, those mopey days where I just don't feel it today. None of those are gone, okay? There's no more moping around. It's not, watching a lot of Dr. Phil and whatever. It was like, get this done. So I did, and that helped, and that, of course, once you produce something, a whole new wave after wave after wave of stress and anxiety about, oh my God, who's going to blurb this? Who's going to buy this? Who's going to sell this? Who's going to, what's the next book? The immediate pressure. What are you going to do in the 10 years before that book comes out? I mean, like, let's get a plan here. So that would bring about all sorts of, funks and stress. But the beauty of having the child was that suddenly, magically, at least for me, it put things in perspective, felt a little different about things. And because I was staying at home and basically taking care of him morning, noon, and night, while my wife earned our income, it was beautiful. It was liberating. It was like, I was so stressed about this first book, and it has to be this, and it has to be that, and it has to exist, and all of it. And now it's like, oh my God, he's walking. Oh my God, I get to hang out with him and play all day, and then write, and then play, and then write, and then play. And I don't know, 12 years later, it's like, pinch me. I can't, I mean, it's the wonderful balance that I could never have dreamed of. I couldn't conceive of it before he materialized. And now, of course, now that I've sent off this partial manuscript to my agent, I can't stop checking my email. I'm a pain in the ass. I'm prickly. I'm not fun to be around, but I'm wonderful with him. So.
This seems like such a quintessential Swarthmore kind of question. The sun is shining, it's just beautiful, and we're like, let's go dark. Where are we tortured? And it's a really hard question for me to answer. It's funny, and I read it like 3 times and kind of had no good thought of how I might answer this question, which probably says a lot about me. But I mean, I have an interesting career in that as things in the world get worse, I have more stories to tell. It's kind of a weird inverse coping mechanism. So there's no shortage right now of great documentary topics because the world is really insane. And so I suppose in some weird way, that's sort of my way of controlling the things that are the scariest, because I go into them and rip them apart and dissect them and put them back together in little pieces that I can understand, and package it and ship it out to you all and say, here you go, here's your crisis of the day. And it kind of works, but I'm sure it takes a toll also. I've worked on some pretty dark topics. I worked on a project about the opiate epidemic in Ohio that I needed to like sit in the sun for a month after that and just see the sky, and because that one got me down. That was hard. But I also get to tell the stories of people doing inspiring things and people who I just think are rock stars. And every day I kind of wake up with some little nugget that they said stuck in my head, and I think, wow, okay, there's a whole other way to approach the world, and I get to kind of walk in their shoes for whatever period of time I'm working on that project. So that helps. And I'm always on deadlines, so I don't have time to think about things too long. It's just like, okay, tomorrow I got to get through this.